Spider-Man 2 was one of the most anticipated games from 2023, and when it came out, it was a massive success. But for me, Spider-Man 2 was one of the bigger disappointments. I felt like it was somewhat of a lackluster sequel. By no means does that mean I hate this game or think that it's bad, it's quite the opposite. I had a really good time playing this game and I enjoyed it every second of the way. And I know for a sequel to such an amazing game like the first Spider-Man, it's going to be hard to top it in a lot of ways. But by no means is the first Spider-Man perfect, and there were still a lot of areas where this game could have improved. And they did improve in some areas, I won't deny that, but I also feel like it got worse in a lot of ways. Initially after beating it, I was pretty high on this game and thought it was fairly on par with the first game, or just slightly worse. But as time goes on, I feel the game aging worse and worse for me. And let me repeat myself, I still think the game is great and I had so much fun playing it. I was just expecting a lot more from this game. I was expecting improvements with every aspect of it. I was ready for Spider-Man 1, but just larger and better in every way, but instead we just got a worse version of the first game. That's why this game was a disappointment for me. I don't know if I was just expecting too much from it, but it's just lacking in a good amount of areas. I think they had all the pieces and foundation to make a game better than the first. You had a large-scale villain like Venom, you had two playable Spider-Men, and an even bigger New York City. They had the building blocks there, but the execution of it was just not up to the par that I was expecting. I still think it's a good game, but I was expecting one that could be one of my favorites ever. Getting into the actual game now, we'll start off with the improvements and the positive parts from it, and there's a lot to praise about Spider-Man 2. One of those things is the enhanced and improved New York City. Playing Spider-Man 2, you realize honestly how big of a jump they took with the quality of New York City from the first game to the second. When you compare both games, there's a pretty big difference in rendering quality, detail, size. They upped the scale with New York City in a lot of ways. Just by simply looking at the maps for both games, we can tell how much more we have to explore. We see portions of Brooklyn and Queens added, and I'm very happy they did make the city bigger by adding more boroughs. Does it make it feel more alive, and is there more content to be had with this bigger world? That's a different story that we'll get into later, but we can still appreciate how they upped the scale with New York City. The game is gorgeous in every single way. I never got tired of just simply swinging around and taking in the setting and just admiring everything. One of my favorite parts of playing was simply going on top of super tall buildings and just looking around. I never got tired of seeing this world, and it was one of my favorite parts about this game. There's nothing groundbreakingly different with it, but there was no need to. The setting was already amazing in the first game, and they made the changes that were needed to improve it. Another thing I'll absolutely praise Insomniac for was with this larger scale world, they added new forms of traversing to make it easier to get around faster. The new and improved traversal is probably my favorite part of this entire game, and that moves us into the next section of this video, which is the gameplay. The traversal was something that everyone loved in the first game and found amazing, and so did I. But I don't know if I could ever go back to it after playing Spider-Man 2. The jumping quality is absolutely insane with the new features and just enhanced speed of swinging around. The addition of the web wings was so good and it made traversing New York City so much better. It made getting around so much easier and faster that it doesn't even feel like the world is bigger, which I think is so well done. And having the ability to fly through those little circle things to gain more speed was a really cool feature as well. Also, being able to catapult yourself forward was so much fun to do, and I did it every chance I got. It took me so long to even notice that there was a map in the bottom corner that showed the setup locations to use them. I would just do it between buildings, and I was so confused how I never found one of the locations yet. Lastly, with the traversal, they added two abilities that both Spider-Man share, and it's an amazing feature. They added the Spider Dash and Spider Jump as abilities to move around the city even faster, which was an amazing addition. The traversal again is probably my favorite part of this entire game. They improved it in every way imaginable and added features that I never even knew were needed, but can never play without again. Next part of the gameplay that we'll move into is the combat. This one is a lot more difficult for me to judge if it's better than the first game. I think it improves in a lot of ways, but also gets worse in some. The first way that it improves is just simply being able to play as both Spider-Men. Both of them have such unique abilities that it really does feel like two completely different combat experiences, which I think is amazing. I definitely preferred playing as Miles even after Peter got symbiote abilities. I don't know why, it just felt like Miles was so OP in comparison to Peter. The combination of all of Miles' abilities was just amazing. Like when you use that big powerful ability for Miles, all of your smaller ones recharge, and it's just actually unfair. But getting more into the details of the abilities, I think it was an improvement from the first game. The only downside was, at least for me, it felt like they recharged way too quickly, both the abilities and gadgets. Maybe I'm making that up, but I just felt like I used them a lot more in fights compared to the first game. Also, Pierre's abilities before he gets the symbiote ones are most definitely the most boring ones in the game. We had the Spire Whiplash, the Spire Rush, Spire Shock, and the Spire Barrage. By no means are they bad, but compared to Miles and the symbiote ones, they're definitely the worst. Once you get the symbiote abilities though, the combat takes a massive leap and Pierre becomes so much more enjoyable to use. All the symbiote abilities were great, and using all of them genuinely made Pierre feel so much more powerful. It works perfectly because even the player notices the strength change with Peter once he gains these abilities. Now for Miles, his abilities are just genuinely amazing. With the lightning and venom abilities, it just makes for such a fun combat experience. We have the Venom Punch, Venom Dash, Venom Jump, and Venom Smash. Yo, why does this sound like I'm saying some poem right now? We also have the Chain Lightning, Thunder Burst, Reverse Flux, and Galvanize. Every single ability is great and they're so much fun to use. Now getting into my issues with the combat, let's start off with the gadgets. We go from 8 gadgets to 5. They get rid of the Trip Mine, Spire Drone, Electric Web, Web Bomb, and Impact Web. And they just replaced them with worse versions. They completely scrapped the Electric Web, Spire Drone, and Trip Mine, and with the Web Bomb and Impact Web, they just made new gadgets that do similar things. I don't know what the need of this was. The gadgets were great in the first game and worked really well. Now with this game, they're just not fun to use at all, and I forgot to use them a lot of the time until I got into the late game. It was something that they should have expanded on instead of reducing. Another one of my issues with the combat is the difficulty. It was just way too easy. I do not consider myself at all someone who is great at video games. I rarely ever play on the hardest difficulty and usually just go for the second highest. I want to enjoy the game, and usually playing on the hardest, I would end up not enjoying the game as much because of the difficulty. But Spider-Man 2 was just so easy. I played the game on the hardest difficulty and basically had no issues the entire game. Obviously there were some parts where it was kind of challenging, but for the hardest difficulty, it's not hard at all. You do unlock another difficulty after beating the game, but that should be available to us at the beginning. I do think you take heavy damage in this game on the highest difficulty, but it's not that difficult to avoid getting hit. The parrying and dodging is just extremely easy to time. After I beat this game, I started to play God of War Ragnarok, and the difficulty difference in parrying and just the game in general was crazy. I really wish Spider-Man 2 was more difficult, as the first game was definitely a lot harder to me. Now talking about the enemy types in this game, I think there's a decent variety. We have the symbiotes, the hunters, and just your normal street thugs. And there's a lot of variety within these 3 groups of enemies, so I really don't have any issue with it. There's enough variety to where a lot of the enemies you have to fight in different ways compared to others, which helps keep the combat engaging and fun. Just like the first game where they introduced the Sable International as enemies later in the game, they do the same thing with the symbiotes. This works well for me as it introduces a new enemy type to the player instead of just facing the hunters the entire game. The last thing to talk about for the gameplay is the boss fights, and for me, this was a massive improvement from the first game. I enjoyed the bosses from Spider-Man 1, but they weren't anything amazing. My 2 favorite fights from that game were easily the Mr. Negative fights and the Doc Ock one, but with those fights, I don't think it was as much the boss design was well done, it was more the narrative surrounding those fights. Especially with Doc Ock, it's an amazing fight just for the sheer build-up and narrative standpoint around it. The dynamic and relationship between Peter and Dr. Octavius is amazing, and we see it come to its peak and climax in this fight. A lot of the boss designs for the first game just weren't the best, but the second game definitely improves in that area. The Venom boss fights were amazingly designed. I enjoyed the Kraven fights, and I loved the Miles vs. Peter fight. Every single one of those fights had a unique design, and they were so much fun. Also, we can't forget about the behemoth of a fight that the opening of the game was versus Sandman. The fight was really simple and easy, but the sheer scale and size of that fight was unbelievable. It really showed the capabilities of the PS5. But even other boss fights like Scream, Lizard, Mr. Negative, and outside of the main story, Mysterio, were amazing fights with unique designs. This was most definitely an improvement for me in this game. Now, the second to last thing we're going to talk about in this video is the side content. For me, the side content leaves a decent bit to be desired. I think there's a similar amount of side content comparatively in both games, but overall, Spider-Man 1's was better to me. I'm not gonna sit here and act like the first game's side content was unbelievable, because it wasn't. I definitely have my issues with it. But Spider-Man 2 just really doesn't improve on it at all. So many of the things in this game are just worse reskins of things in the first. The Spire bots were fairly boring, the Prowler stashes were repetitive, the EMF experiments were better than the other two things, but still not that fun. Also, most of the narrative side content in Spider-Man 2 just wasn't that good to me. Especially the museum and Brooklyn Vision missions, that stuff was so boring. They really did Miles dirty with the side content in this game. I did enjoy the flame missions with Wraith though, I thought those were pretty good, and the Mysterio stuff was really cool, I had a good time with that too. Also, the app request missions were really good, but there's only 6 of them. There could have at least been a dozen of these. There were so many more missions like these in the first game. I do honestly enjoy the ones in 2 more than a lot of the ones in Spider-Man 1, but there's just a lack of it. I feel like my biggest issue with the side content in Spider-Man 2 is just the lack of it, and the lack of quality with the more narrative multiple mission ones. Like with the first game, the Tombstone and Taskmaster stuff was great, and I really enjoyed those. I don't think the side content is terrible, but they really don't make any big improvements with it in this game. I would have loved to see more short narrative missions with Harry, MJ, P and Miles doing missions together, and just more interaction with the city. The first game did a great job of making the city feel alive with its side content, but that's something the second game was not able to do. You rarely ever interact with the people of this city, and for some reason everyone is just so nice in this game, it doesn't feel like New York City at all. Everyone is so kind and polite, and that's just not the case with what New York City is. The best example of New York City we get in this game is the flashback mission we get with Pete when he's riding that bike. The city felt more like a set piece than an actual living city. I would have loved it if we were just able to interact and do smaller things like go play basketball with people at a court, walk into a few stores and be able to interact with the people there. We just needed a lot more side content involving the people of this city. That wraps up the side content for this game, so let's finally move into the story and narrative. This for me is by far my biggest issue with this game. I don't think it's a bad story, but comparing it to the first game, it definitely falls short. I think they had everything available to them to make an amazing story. The building blocks were there, but the execution of it was done poorly. I think the story that they wanted to tell was just too big for the playtime that they gave it. It felt rushed in some places, and I don't think that we got to see certain things developed enough, with the story not being as long as it needed to. The pacing for this game I feel like is really weird. The game starts off fast, but like also not fast at all. The opening mission is crazy with the fight against Sandman, and they really just throw you right into it, but then basically nothing really happens for a while until Harry becomes Agent Venom, and after that Pete getting the symbiote. Once Peter gets the symbiote, it's just non-stop action for basically the rest of the game. There's a few slower missions here and there, but it just feels like too much action for too long. I love the concept of the symbiote, and I always enjoy seeing it in Spider-Man stories. But Spider-Man 2 does not do the best of jobs with that plotline. It's extremely rushed in my opinion. I really wish we saw Pete have the suit longer and really see the effects the symbiote had on him. He has the symbiote for a few hours of game time, and he says a few unnice things. I really feel like we didn't see a full-fledged symbiote suit Spider-Man. Like, I wanted to see Bully Yuri. I also feel like they really didn't show too many of the issues that Pete was going through prior to gaining the symbiote. I feel like they were trying to make this game really show the struggles that Pete is having, but they really didn't execute that well. Peter definitely goes through a few things prior to getting the suit, but I honestly would have much rather seen his life fall apart before he got it. So that makes sense why he gets attached to the symbiote so much, because to him, this makes his life better. They obviously were trying to go with that, with him constantly saying this makes me a better Spider-Man, but the reasons for him feeling this way just aren't supported too well in the story. Overall, I think the reason the game is paced badly is because of the length of this game. If it was around another 5 hours long, I think it would have helped tremendously. We needed to see more development and interactions between characters. Characters act in certain ways that the game doesn't really support. Like, they all really want Pete to get rid of the symbiote, which makes sense, but the game really doesn't do the greatest of jobs of showing Pete absolutely lose it. Like, yeah, some parts here and there you can definitely see its effects, but we needed more in my opinion. The game was too rushed to fully flesh out some of these character arcs. One relationship that I felt was extremely undermined was Miles and Pete's. I honestly feel like they barely interact in this game. For large portions of it, we have Miles calling Pete and either him not picking up or hanging up after a few seconds because of Harry. I wouldn't have minded that if it was actually used more as a plot point, Venom mentions it to Miles in their final fight, but that's about it. We play as two Spider-Men, but they feel extremely separated as there's not many missions where we actually play as both of them, which I think was a missed opportunity. Some of my favorite parts in this game were the missions that we played as both Miles and Pete. I was just expecting their relationship and dynamic to be more important in this game, but it wasn't. Now to talk about the other characters in this game, Harry and MJ were honestly pretty good. As standalone characters, I think they were great, but again, the relationship between characters wasn't executed the best. Harry I really enjoyed in this game, and for the limited screen time that we got with Harry and Pete, they were great together and you can see the chemistry there. But the relationship that they have basically ceases to exist once Pete gets the symbiote suit, so we really only see their relationship for the first half of this game. But Harry was definitely one of the best parts of this game, and I wish they did more with him and Pete's relationship and dynamic in the second half of the story. Also, MJ is pretty good in this game. Her missions were truly improved by 1000%. They were so boring in the first game, but with the second game, they were pretty fun. But she has absolutely insane plot armor. Like, there's just no way that she survived all the encounters as she did. I have the same issues with her though as I do with Harry, and that is a lack of a viewable relationship with Pete in this game, as we don't see too much interaction between them. I also really enjoyed the screen fight that they had and seeing them conflict and argue, but I wish they built up the issues between them a little bit more before this fight. Before we finish talking about all the things I don't like about this story though, let's talk about the good parts because there are still a good amount. I really enjoyed the mission structure in this game. I think they did a good job of giving a lot of variety within these missions, and I basically enjoyed every single mission in this game. Some of my favorite missions were the very first one against Sandman, Peter and Harry revisiting their old school. We'll just ignore the fact that they're grown men in their mid-20s visiting their old high school. Not weird at all. But also, the Black Cat mission was really cool, and basically every mission once you learn that Harry has the symbiote are so much fun. I still stand by the fact that I think it's a little bit poorly paced, but those missions are still amazing. The best missions in the game for me though were Peter getting the symbiote, the Miles and Pete fight, and playing as Venom. There are genuinely so many memorable missions in this game. Also, another great part about the story is Kraven. I was not expecting him to be such a good character and villain, but he was. He stole the show every single time he was on the screen, and I feel like they used his character perfectly in this game. His entire arc throughout is so good, and his death is just the most fitting death for his character. Another character that I think was handled great was Mr. Negative. I really enjoyed the redemption arc that he had in this game. I wasn't expecting this sort of redemption for him, but I really enjoyed it, and I liked seeing the dynamic that Miles and he had in this game. I also really liked that one moment with Pete, Harry, and MJ where they all argue about the symbiote. Like I said before, there weren't enough moments like this. We see a conflict here and we needed to see more of that throughout the game. Another thing that we needed more of was Venom. This is the best adaptation of Venom that we have ever had in my opinion. He was so good in this game, but he's only in the last few missions. Looking at the first game, someone like Doc Ock we see throughout the entire game, and obviously we see Harry throughout the game, but it's just not the same. Venom was such a cool character and didn't have enough screen time at all. This just comes back to the same issue that this game wasn't long enough. Again, an extra 5 hours would have let us see more Venom, and I think that would have improved the game so much. It's annoying that some parts that I really liked are hit back with the negative side of us not getting enough of that good thing. I really think it just comes down to the fact that Sony pushed this game out way too fast. I don't believe they gave Insomniac the chance to do everything they wanted to, which is sad to see. Now, my last issue with the story are the peaks. I don't think they compare at all to the first games. When we look at Spider-Man 1, we have Aunt May's death and basically the entire Doc Ock fight. Those are genuinely some of my favorite moments in gaming. There's such an emotion behind these scenes that the second game wasn't able to do. The only moment that really compares to those is the Venom fight and Harry's fake death, but that is nowhere close to the moments from Spider-Man 1. That's not me saying that I didn't enjoy that final sequence of Spider-Man 2. I still thought it was good, but it just doesn't hit the same at all. I really think one of the biggest reasons why is the fact that they changed the face model for Peter. The old face model just has so much more emotion behind it, and I really think that was one of the big reasons those scenes hit harder. But also just the build up and execution of those moments were better. Now, the last thing we'll talk about in the story is the ending and what we can expect to see from Spider-Man 3. With everything that happened to Harry, Norman is very mad at the Spider-Man, and it's pretty obvious that he is most likely going to be Green Goblin in Spider-Man 3, and I'm beyond excited for that. They genuinely couldn't have made it more obvious by having him wear green and purple so often. I swear that's all he wore. We also saw Norman reach out to Dr. Octavius, so we could be seeing Doc Ock return as well, which would just be simply perfect. I'm intrigued with how they're going to go about this because I don't think Peter is going to be around as Spider-Man at the start of this game. So it will be cool to see how he's brought back. And we also saw Cindy Moon, or better known as Silk, at the very end of this game. So it will be really cool to see what they do with her character. My biggest hope for Spider-Man 3 is that they don't make the same mistake with this one where they try to do too much in too short of a time. I'm hoping Spider-Man 3 is longer and that they just nail the narrative. I know there were a lot of critiques and issues I had with this game, but that does not mean that I didn't enjoy it. I still had an amazing time playing Spider-Man 2. It was such a fun game and I enjoyed every second of it. It's one of those weird games where I can sit here and notice a decent amount wrong with it, but still end up enjoying it a lot. My major issue with this game ended up being the narrative, but that's not me saying it's a bad one. It's completely fine and it works. Just compared to the first game, I think it's lackluster. This game just simply needed more time. It had everything there to be a masterpiece, but they didn't execute it right, and I do believe that's purely down to the fact that Sony pushed it out too quickly. I think if we got an extra year or so of time, this game would have been so much more fleshed out with its content and narrative. It's sad to see that it ended up this way, but in no way is this game a failure. I was just expecting more from it. My final rating of Spider-Man 2 is an 8 out of 10. I know that might sound high after how much I bashed this game, but I truly did have a great time playing it. This game was just clearly rushed out in my opinion, and it's sad to see because this game could have been truly great. If you guys made it to the end of this video, I really appreciate it and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did like it, it would mean a lot if you guys could comment, like, subscribe, do whatever. Also, there will be a link in the description to my TikTok page. I post on there multiple times a day, so it would really mean a lot if you guys could go check that out and follow it. Again, thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next video with my review on God of War Ragnarok.